What drives a human soul to seek the absolute edge of existence? To build a home where the earth ends, and where the ocean screams its violent fury against cold, unforgiving stone. Across the most remote corners of our world, there are structures that defy both gravity and human reason. Tiny wooden cabins clinging to sheer vertical cliffs, stone cells perched on towering mountain pillars, and solitary lighthouses swallowed by 90-foot waves in the dead of winter. These are not merely houses. They are monuments to isolation. They are the final outposts of humanity. Imagine waking up every single morning, knowing that one careless step outside your front door would plunge you hundreds of feet down into an empty chasm. Imagine the psychological weight of absolute silence, broken only by the howling wind and the crushing force of nature. Today, we step beyond the safety of modern civilization. We leave the comfort of our crowded, brightly lit cities. We are about to journey into the impossible. Welcome to Earth Discovered. Let us begin our descent on a jagged, black tooth of rock rising from the violent waters of the North Atlantic Ocean. This is Skellig, Michael. Located nearly 8 miles off the southwest coast of County Kerry, Ireland, this ancient sandstone pyramid stands a towering 715 feet high. From a distance, it appears entirely uninhabitable. A jagged, desolate rock clawing at the grey, low-hanging clouds. Yet in the 6th century, a small group of Christian monks looked at this terrifying vertical island and chose to make it their home. They did not seek comfort. They sought the ultimate test of faith. But to survive here, they had to battle an environment that wanted nothing more than to sweep them into the abyss. The winds here regularly exceed 100 miles per hour. Salty air, heavy with moisture and cold rain, enters every microscopic crack in the stone. It slowly eats away at the island, causing massive slabs of rock to suddenly detach and crash into the churning sea below. To reach the monastery, which sits perched on a narrow ledge, 600 feet above the water, the monks had to construct a path. They carved over 600 stone steps directly into the sheer cliffside. These steps have no handrails. They have no safety nets. They are narrow, uneven, and constantly slick with sea spray and black moss. Even today, a single misstep on these ancient stones means a violent, uncontrolled fall into the rocks below. As you climb, the wind tears at your clothes, trying to push you off balance. The roaring of the North Atlantic rings in your ears like a deafening warning. Why would anyone endure this? How did they manage to carry heavy, jagged stones up this vertical ladder without falling to their deaths? Once you survive the climb, you reach the outer enclosure of the monastery. Here 6 stone beehive huts, known as klashans, cling to the rock like giant prehistoric nests. These huts were built entirely without mortar. No cement, no mud, no binding agent of any kind holds them together. Instead, the monks used a highly advanced dry stone engineering technique called corbelling. Each flat sandstone slab was laid slightly overlapping the one beneath it, sloping gently outward to shed the relentless rain. The gravity of the stones themselves locks the structure into a rigid, indestructible vault. For over 1,400 years, through the most violent winter storms in recorded history, These mortarless huts have stood completely untouched. They have outlasted empires, wars, and modern skyscrapers. Yet inside these cold, dark cells, life was a masterclass in extreme deprivation. The monks lived in near total darkness. The only light came from a tiny, low-set doorway and a single slit-like window facing the empty horizon. There are no natural springs on Skellig. Fresh water is a luxury that had to be captured from the sky. The monks carved deep channels into the bedrock, directing every drop of rainwater into 2 stone cisterns built within the monastery walls. If a drought lasted too long, or if the winter frost froze the cisterns solid, they faced a slow, agonizing death from dehydration. Their diet consisted of whatever they could forage, from the barren rock and the violent sea. They harvested nesting puffins and gannets, collected wild sea campion, and risked their lives casting fishing lines from the lower ledges of the cliffs. Every day was a fragile contract with survival. But there was an even darker threat that haunted this vertical sanctuary. In the late 8th century, longboats appeared on the horizon. The Vikings had arrived. For these pagan raiders, Skellig was a perfect, defenseless target. They scaled the steps, looted the small chapel, and left the monks to starve on their isolated rock. Yet, despite the storms, the starvation, and the violent raids, the monks stayed. They refused to surrender their isolation. It was only in the 13th century, when a severe shift in the global climate brought colder temperatures and even more devastating winter storms, that they finally abandoned the island. Let us pause and consider the sheer psychological reality of this existence. For weeks at a time, thick ocean fog would swallow the island entirely, cutting off the earth, the sky, and even the base of the cliffs below. The monks were suspended in a featureless white void, with no sensory input other than the wet mist on their skin, and the deep, low-frequency vibration of waves colliding with the root of the island. In this state of sensory deprivation, many would succumb to madness. The boundaries between the physical world and the spiritual realm dissolved. They would hear voices in the wind and see shapes in the shifting fog. Yet, to them, this was not a descent into insanity. It was the ultimate refinement of the soul. They believed that by stripping away all worldly noise, they could hear the voice of the divine. It is this radical commitment to suffering that makes Skellig more than just an engineering marvel. It is a testament to what humans are willing to endure when they believe their purpose is larger than their physical bodies. Today, Skellig stands silent, an empty stone fortress of the human spirit. As you look out from the highest ledge, feeling the cold wind sting your face, you cannot help but wonder, could you survive even a single week in this stone cell? Could your mind handle the terrifying, constant presence of the empty void? If you are ready to embark on this epic journey through the most impossible corners of our planet, take a brief moment to drop a comment below, telling me where in the world you are watching from right now. Let us know your coordinates on this fragile Earth. Then, hit that like button, subscribe to Earth Discovered, and turn on your notifications, so you never lose your way in the wild landscapes of our upcoming videos. From the ancient stone pyramid of Skellig, we travel eastward, deep into the mist-shrouded peaks of southwest China. Here, rising out of the green canopy of Guizhou province, stands a geological marvel that defies belief. This is Fanjingshan. Also known as Mount Fanjing, this solitary rock finger reaches an altitude of 8,438 feet. It has stood as a silent witness to the passage of time for over 1.4 billion years. But it is not just the ancient stone that captures the imagination. It is what sits at the very peak of this vertical spire. Perched precariously on the summit of the Golden Summit, two sacred Buddhist temples cling to the rock. They look down upon a vertical drop of hundreds of feet. They are connected by a single, narrow stone bridge, hanging directly over a yawning chasm. To reach this sanctuary in the sky, one must possess an iron will. The journey requires you to conquer nearly 9,000 steep stone steps. These steps are carved directly into the vertical cliffside. At its narrowest points, the path is barely wide enough for a single human foot. Iron chains are bolted into the cold rock face. They are the only thing standing between you and a straight fall into the empty air below. As you climb higher, the air grows thin and cold. The wind screams through the narrow crevices of the mountain. Heavy mountain fog can roll in within seconds. It completely swallows the path, leaving you blind, suspended on a vertical ladder of stone. Why did ancient builders choose to construct these temples at such a vertical height? The physical labor required to carry timber, stone, and mortar up these 9,000 steps is almost unimaginable. Every single brick was carried on the backs of devoted builders, climbing step by step over thousands of vertical feet. One slip meant certain death. These temples were built during the Ming dynasty, starting in the 14th century. They have withstood 500 years of lightning strikes, heavy snowfall, and violent earthquakes. Yet, they built. They constructed the Temple of Buddha and the Temple of Meteora on two separate rock peaks. They are divided by a deep, natural crack in the mountain. The stone bridge that spans this gap sits at an altitude of 8,200 feet. Crossing it in a heavy wind is an exercise in pure terror. The bridge sways in the wind. The deep valley below is hidden by a shifting sea of white clouds. This isolated mountain is also the exclusive home of the Guizhou golden monkey. These rare primates are ancient spirits from the Ice Age. Only about 800 of them remain in the wild today. They glide silently through the ancient forests of Fanjingshan, far below the noisy world of modern humans. Adding to the surreal nature of this landscape is the famous mushroom stone. This is a 33-foot tall rock formation. It balances absurdly on a tiny eroded base. It has survived millions of years of violent storms, freezing ice, and tectonic shifts. It stands as a symbol of impossible balance. At the summit, above the clouds, the noise of the modern world fades into absolute quiet. You are standing on a solitary island in the sky. But when the storm clouds gather, and lightning strikes the iron chains on the steps, the illusion of peace is instantly shattered. You realize how fragile your presence on this rock truly is. Would you climb these 9,000 steps to find a moment of peace? Or does the thought of standing on a narrow bridge at 8,200 feet make your heart freeze with fear? Let us know in the comments below if you would dare to make this journey. Let us now cross the continents, moving from the high peaks of China to a desolate archipelago in the North Atlantic. This is Gásadalur. It is a tiny, isolated village on the island of Vagar, part of the Faroe Islands. Gásadalur sits on a high green plateau. This plateau drops straight into the ocean, through a sheer 100-foot basalt cliff. From the edge of the village, a famous waterfall, Monemvasia, pours a heavy stream of water directly into the roaring sea below. This village is a fortress of green turf, suspended between dark, jagged mountains and a violent, unyielding ocean. For centuries, Gásadalur was one of the most isolated communities on Earth. There were no roads connecting it to the rest of the island. The only way to reach the village was to hike over a steep, treacherous mountain pass. This path rose over 1,400 feet above the cliffs. It was a grueling climb, often slick with mud, and battered by sudden violent windstorms. Alternatively, postal workers and villagers had to risk their lives, climbing a dangerous vertical ladder carved into the basalt cliff face. They had to do this while carrying heavy supplies on their backs, with the ocean waves crashing directly beneath them. In Gásadalur, there are no trees to block the wind. Relentless wind gusts can reach speeds of 100 miles per hour. The force of the wind is so great that it can lift the heavy turf roofs straight off the wooden houses. To prevent this, residents build their homes with low profiles, covering the roofs with thick layers of living grass and soil. This grass acts as a natural anchor, weighting the house down against the atmospheric pressure. The Faroe Islands experience more than 250 rainy days each year. The soil is constantly saturated. The green fields surrounding the village are not soft pastures. They are cold, deep sponges, ready to turn into deep mud with a single footstep. When a heavy winter storm arrives, the landscape transforms into a theater of raw power. The Monemvasia waterfall is caught by the upward draft of the wind. The water is blown backward, spraying over the village like a cold, salty rain. The waterfall becomes an open wound, pouring mud-stained water into the white foam of the Atlantic. For generations, the population of Gásadalur dwindled. By the early 2000s, only about a dozen people remained. The village was dying. Then, in the year 2004, everything changed. Engineers blasted a tunnel directly through the solid rock of the surrounding mountain. For the first time in history, cars could drive directly into Gásadalur. The isolation was broken. The tunnel saved the village from complete abandonment. But it also brought the modern world. Tourists now crowd the paths, pointing cameras at the waterfall, breaking the ancient silence that had stood for centuries. Was this tunnel a savior, Or did it destroy the very soul of Gásadalur? Before the tunnel, if a villager fell critically ill, they had to be carried over the mountain pass on a wooden stretcher. Many died before they could ever reach a doctor. The village cemetery sits on a lonely hill, overlooking the endless ocean. The graves are marked by simple stones, worn smooth by the salty wind. They are silent reminders of the price of isolation. If you had to choose, would you live in the absolute quiet of an isolated prison, or invite the noisy world in to save your home? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. The choice between preservation and progress is one of the most difficult questions of our age. And as we continue our journey, we will see that this choice is faced by extreme communities all over the globe. To escape the wrath of an empire, would you abandon the solid ground forever? To survive, would you build a world made entirely of grass, floating on a freezing lake miles above the clouds? This is the reality of Lake Titicaca, a massive body of water straddling the border of Peru and Bolivia. At an extreme altitude of 12,507 feet, the air is thin and cold. The sun burns with an intense raw ultraviolet light. And here, floating on the deep blue water, lies the nation of the Uros people. Over 500 years ago, the expansion of the aggressive Inca Empire threatened their very existence. They had no powerful army. They had no massive stone fortresses. So, they made a radical choice. They retreated into the giant reed beds of the lake and built their own land. These are the floating islands of Uros. Every single thing you see here is made from Meteora reeds. The ground beneath your feet, the walls of the houses, the roofs, even the boats that glide silently across the water. The Meteora reed is a miracle of nature. Its stem contains millions of microscopic hollow air pockets. These air bubbles provide a natural buoyancy that keeps the heavy layers of grass afloat. But this is not a permanent foundation. The portion of the reeds submerged in the freezing lake water is in a state of constant, relentless decay. The water rots the organic fibers, causing the island to slowly sink into the dark depths of Lake Titicaca. To survive, the Uros people must work in a ceaseless, unending cycle. Every 15 to 20 days, they must lay fresh, green reeds on the surface. They stack them in perpendicular layers, building the ground upward, even as it rots from below. Walking on these islands is an unsettling sensation. With every single step, the soft ground sinks 2 to 4 inches beneath your weight. It feels like walking on a giant water-filled mattress. Occasionally, the cold lake water seeps through the reed fibers, wetting your shoes with an icy reminder of the abyss just inches below. An island has a lifespan of only about 30 years. When the rot becomes too deep, the island must be abandoned. The family must build a new one from scratch. But there is a strange, beautiful side to this unstable life. Because the islands are held in place by wooden posts and rope, they can be altered. If a severe conflict arises between families, they do not argue. They take a giant handsaw. they cut the floating island completely in half. They pull up the anchors and drift away to opposite sides of the lake. Imagine that level of freedom. Imagine resolving a neighborhood feud by simply sawing your yard in half and floating away. But as the modern world offers concrete houses and warm, dry floors, many young Uros are leaving the reeds behind. They choose the solid ground of the cities. Would you trade a life of constant floating freedom for the static safety of dry land? Tell us in the comments if you could sleep peacefully, knowing your floor is slowly rotting away. Let us leave the high lakes of the Andes and fly back to the violent expanse of the open ocean. This is Bishop Rock. It is a tiny isolated granite rock, sitting on the westernmost edge of the Isles of Scilly, United Kingdom. Guinness World Records once listed this barren rock as the smallest island on Earth with a building on it. And that building is a monument to human engineering. The Bishop Rock Lighthouse. In the mid-19th century, this area was a notorious graveyard for ships. Hundreds of vessels were torn apart by the hidden granite reefs. A lighthouse was desperately needed. But how do you build a heavy stone tower on a tiny rock that is constantly washed over by the violent waves of the Atlantic? The first attempt was an iron structure. Before it could even be completed, a massive storm swept it entirely into the sea. Engineers realized they needed something heavier, something indestructible. They chose granite. They spent years carving and shaping 6,000 tons of massive granite blocks. Each block was engineered with intricate, interlocking dovetailed joints. This design locks the entire structure into a single, monolithic pillar of stone. It does not resist the ocean with weight alone. It becomes part of the rock itself. The tower stands 161 feet tall. But during the brutal winter storms, the Atlantic Ocean unleashes waves up to 98 feet high. These gargantuan columns of grey water crash directly into the lighthouse. They climb the granite walls, entirely swallowing the lantern room at the very top. For the lighthouse keepers who once lived inside, these storms were a psychological nightmare. 3 men were crammed into 10 tight, stacked floors. The rooms were circular, barely a few feet wide. When a massive wave struck, the entire granite tower would shake violently. The plates would rattle on the shelves. The air would vibrate with a deafening roar. The keepers would sit in silence, praying that the dovetailed joints would hold for one more wave. If they stepped outside onto the narrow gallery, they would be instantly swept away. They were prisoners of a stone pillar, surrounded by a raging watery desert. In 1991, the lighthouse was automated. The last keepers packed their bags and left the rock forever. Today it operates entirely by remote control, its light reaching 27 miles into the darkness. It still stands, solitary, unyielding. Could you handle the mental isolation of living inside a shaking stone tower, while 98-foot waves crash against your windows? Let us know in the comments if you have the mental strength to survive here. From the roaring, salt crust walls of Bishop Rock. We escape the ocean's reach. But we do not find safety. Instead, we enter a world where water is a forgotten myth, and the earth itself has been baked into a silent, red furnace. This is the Namib Desert, a vast, ancient wilderness stretching along the southwestern coast of Africa. Here, the dunes rise like frozen tidal waves of orange sand, some reaching heights of nearly 1,000 feet. It is a landscape of absolute hostility. The ground is so dry that it cracks open under the intense glare of a sun that never seems to set. And yet, hidden deep within this ocean of sand, lies a home that does not fight the desert. It hides inside it. This is Eagle's Nest, Namibia. At first glance, you might not even see it. The structures are built directly into giant, weathered granite boulders. These massive, smooth rocks are ancient. They were once pools of liquid magma, cooling deep beneath the Earth's crust hundreds of millions of years ago. Before wind, sand, and time stripped the top layers away, to reveal them like giant, bleached bones. The builders did not clear these stones to build a flat house. They used the boulders as the natural walls and ceilings of their shelter. The result is a home that feels less like a human creation, and more like a cave that has learned to breathe. Life in the Namib Desert is a constant trial of fire and ice. This region receives less than 4 inches of rainfall in an entire year. Every living thing here, every plant, insect, and animal, has learned to slow its heart down, holding its breath through droughts that can stretch for years. But the true test is the temperature. During the day, the desert sun beats down with an oppressive force, pushing temperatures well above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The air becomes a heavy, shimmering wall of heat that burns your lungs with every breath. But when the sun dips below the horizon, the heat vanishes instantly into the cloudless sky. Within hours, the temperature plunges, dropping near a freezing 32 degrees Fahrenheit. This rapid shift is a violent shock to the human body. It is a daily transition from a furnace to a frozen wasteland. Yet, the granite walls of Eagle's Nest offer an elegant, ancient solution. Throughout the scorching day, the heavy, dense stone absorbs the intense solar energy. It locks the heat deep within its mineral core. Then, as the cold night air settles over the sand, the boulders slowly, steadily release that stored warmth back into the living space. The house itself acts as a massive thermal battery, regulating the climate of its inhabitants through pure physics. But despite this ingenious design, the physical reality of living here is deeply isolating. There are no power lines stretching across this desert. There are no water mains, no grocery stores, and no neighbors for miles. To survive, you must be entirely self-reliant. Every drop of water must be carefully hauled and rationed. Every generator must be maintained. If you make a critical error, or if your equipment fails in the middle of a summer heatwave, help is hours, if not days, away. The desert does not offer second chances. It simply waits. As you sit inside this stone room at night, listening to the rocks crack and pop as they cool down, you realize your own insignificance. You are a temporary visitor in a landscape that has existed for millions of years. Would you have the courage to live in a place where nature's mood changes so violently every single day? Could you handle the absolute quiet of a desert night, where the only sound is the beating of your own heart? Tell us in the comments if you would choose the fire and ice of the Namib Desert. Now, we must travel to the absolute opposite end of our planet's temperature scale. From the burning, dry sands of Africa, we head north, far beyond the Arctic Circle. Here, where the Earth is frozen solid and the sun disappears for months at a time, stands a building designed to survive the end of the world. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Located on the remote Norwegian island of Spitsbergen, only about 800 miles from the North Pole, this structure is often called the Doomsday Vault. It sits like a massive, concrete wedge, sticking out of the side of a frozen sandstone mountain. At night, the entrance glows with a pale green and turquoise light, appearing like a stranded spaceship, half buried in the Arctic snow. This is not a home for living humans. It is a home for the future of our species. The vault is buried 394 feet deep inside the mountain bedrock. This extreme depth was chosen for a very specific reason: protection. The surrounding mountain is wrapped in thick permafrost. Even if the global power grid were to collapse entirely, and all the cooling generators failed, the permafrost would keep the vault frozen at a natural, ideal temperature of -0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside this frozen mountain sanctuary, 3 massive, concrete-lined chambers hold the ultimate treasure of humanity. Nearly 1 million unique seed samples from almost every country on Earth are stored here in airtight black pouches. These are the genetic blueprints of our food supply. If a global war, a devastating plant pandemic, or a catastrophic climate shift were to destroy our crops, these seeds would allow us to rebuild world agriculture from scratch. It is a silent, frozen library of life. But the location is as dangerous as it is secure. At an altitude of 430 feet, the vault is safe from rising sea levels, but it is surrounded by a harsh, frozen wilderness. Polar bears roam the icy slopes outside the facility, outnumbering the human population of the island. During the dark winter, the sun does not rise for over 100 days. The landscape is gripped by a freezing, pitch-black silence, broken only by the howling of Arctic blizzards that can drop temperatures below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet inside this tomb of ice, there is a profound sense of unity. Seeds from North Korea rest on the same shelves as seeds from the United States. Seeds from nations locked in active, bloody conflict sit side by side in the dark. In this frozen outpost, human political divisions fade away, replaced by a shared, desperate need to protect the future of life itself. It is a time capsule we are sending to the next millennium. as you stand outside the vault, looking at the green lights reflecting off the vast, empty glaciers. You feel a chill that goes deeper than the physical cold. This building exists because we know how fragile our civilization truly is. It is a testament to our intelligence, but also a monument to our fear of our own self-destruction. Would you have the mental fortitude to live and work in a frozen, dark wasteland, guarding the seeds of a future you might never live to see? Let us know your thoughts in the comments as we prepare to leave the Arctic ice and journey back to the ancient stone pillars of the Mediterranean. We leave the howling Arctic winds behind, transitioning from a cold tomb of future survival to the warm, sun-drenched landscapes of the Mediterranean. Yet, even here, in the cradle of ancient civilizations, we find that humans did not seek the flat plains or the fertile valleys. Instead, they looked to the sky, building their sanctuaries on vertical pillars of stone that seem to defy the very laws of gravity. This is Meteora, Greece. Rising abruptly from the flat plains of Thessaly, these colossal sandstone pillars tower up to 1,312 feet into the air. They look like giant, dark fingers clawing at the heavens, smooth and vertical, with no apparent path to the top. For millions of years, wind and rain carved these rocks, leaving behind a landscape that feels entirely alien. Yet, in the 14th century, as war, violence and chaos swept across the land, a group of Orthodox Christian monks looked at these sheer cliffs and saw their only hope for peace. They did not build at the base of the mountains. They chose the very tips of these vertical pillars. To them, the physical danger of the climb was a small price to pay for spiritual safety. Because, the harder it was to reach the summit, the safer their religious life became. Imagine the sheer madness of the initial construction. There were no steps carved into the rock. There were no cranes, no metal scaffolds, and no modern climbing gear. The first monks had to scale these vertical cliffs, using their bare hands and feet, driving wooden pegs into microscopic cracks in the sandstone. Once they reached the top, they let down rope ladders and heavy nets. Before the 1920s, there were still no stone steps. If you wanted to visit one of these high monasteries, you had to place yourself inside a fragile, hand-woven net. You would sit curled in a tight ball, suspended in the open air, while a group of monks at the top slowly turned a wooden winch to pull you up the cliff face. As you swung violently in the wind, watching the ground recede hundreds of feet below, you would ask the monks how often they replaced the ropes. Their answer was legendary: only when they break. Every single piece of building material, every heavy wooden beam, every stone block, and every drop of mortar had to be hauled up using these same ropes and nets. For some monasteries, it took over 20 years of continuous, agonizing labor, just to gather enough materials at the top to begin construction. From a golden age of 24 active monasteries, only 6 remain today, standing quietly among clouds and wind. They stand as monuments to a time when faith was stronger than the fear of death. Would you trust your life to a single, fraying rope, just to find a quiet place to pray? Or has our modern world made us too fearful of the void to ever seek such heights? Tell us in the comments if you would climb into the net. Let us move further south, to the rugged coast of the Peloponnese. Here, rising out of the deep blue waters of the Aegean Sea, sits a massive solitary rock. This is Monemvasia. From the mainland, it looks like a silent barren stone plateau, nearly 984 feet high. But hidden on its seaward slope, entirely invisible to the coast, lies an ancient medieval town. Monemvasia was not always an island. It was connected to the mainland, until a massive earthquake in the year 375 tore the mountain apart, casting it into the sea as a solitary stone island. For over 1,500 years, humans have clung to this slope. The name Monemvasia means single entrance. There is only one narrow, paved causeway that connects this massive rock to the rest of the world. Inside the town, the streets are narrow, winding labyrinths of stone, designed to confuse invaders. The houses are built from the rock itself, their walls blending seamlessly into the cliffs. But this extreme isolation is a double-edged sword. The salty sea mist, heavy and relentless, constantly washes over the town. It slowly eats away at the ancient mortar, weakening the stone walls and threatening to collapse the houses into the sea. During times of war, the single entrance could be easily sealed, turning the town into an impenetrable shield. But if a siege lasted too long, that same shield became a tomb. The residents would starve on their beautiful rock, surrounded by a sea they could not drink. It is proof that sometimes, the strongest walls we build to protect ourselves are the very ones that lock us in. Could you live in a town with only one way out, knowing that a single crisis could cut you off from the earth forever? Let us know your thoughts below as we cross the sea to the volcanic heart of France. Our journey brings us to the ancient volcanic plains of Auvergne, France. Here, rising like a colossal stone needle, straight out of the flat plain, stands a hardened core of a long-dead volcano. This is Saint-Michel d'Aiguille. It stands 279 feet, a vertical pillar of solid basalt that has survived millions of years of erosion. And at the very peak of this volcanic needle sits a sacred chapel over 1,000 years old. Built since the year 969, this architectural masterpiece looks as if it grows straight from the rock peak. To reach the colorful archway at the top, you must conquer 208 steep stone steps. These steps twist and wrap around the pillar, creating the feeling of walking on the scales of a giant snake. The space at the summit is extremely limited. Every single stone block had to be cut, carried, and placed with mathematical precision. Inside that narrow space, the engineering is brilliant. The crossing vaults were cleverly designed to push the pressure toward the cliff edges. This helps the center almost hang in place, preventing the massive structure from crushing the rock core below. This vertical sanctuary is constantly battered by violent storms and lightning. Yet, it has stood for 1,000 years. In 1955, builders working on the altar made a shocking discovery. hidden behind a secret wall. They found an 11th century treasure chamber. It held sacred relics, sleeping in the dark for many ages. It is a reminder that these impossible places do not just hold stone. They hold the forgotten memories of our ancestors, protected from the decay of the modern world by their sheer vertical height. Would you climb the scales of the snake to touch 1,000 years of history? Or are some secrets better left untouched on their high pillars of stone? Imagine living inside a giant bowl of stone, in the middle of a violent, endless ocean. But this is not just any island. This is Aogashima, Japan. Located 222 miles south of the mainland. This tiny speck of land is actually an active volcano. And inside its massive, hollow crater, a small community of 160 to 170 people has built their homes. They sleep every night on a floor of hot volcanic earth. Aogashima is a geological anomaly. It features a rare double caldera structure. This means there is a smaller volcano inside the middle of the old crater. From the air, it looks like a colossal green fortress, rising out of the deep blue waters of the Pacific. The outer walls are sheer basalt cliffs, rising from 600 to 1,312 feet high. These cliffs drop straight into the boiling surf, destroying any idea of a safe shoreline. For centuries, reaching this island was a deadly gamble. Even today, heavy ocean currents, storms and huge waves frequently cut the island off from the world for weeks. Every landing attempt here remains a true gamble with the sea. But the true danger lies beneath. In the late 18th century, the volcano suffered a catastrophic eruption. Nearly half of the island's population perished. The survivors fled, leaving the smoking crater empty for 50 years. Yet, they returned. They rebuilt their school, their farms, and their houses, directly inside the active body of the volcano. They used the natural steam vents to cook their food and heat their water. It is a life lived in nature's double prison. On the outside, the violent, freezing waves of the Pacific block escape. On the inside, the restless, sleeping volcanic fire below their beds could wake at any moment. Would you have the peace of mind to sleep on a ticking time bomb, knowing the very ground beneath you could explode without warning? Let us know in the comments if you would dare to call this volcano home. From the wet, sulphurous vents of Japan, we travel to the bone-dry heart of the Australian outback. Here, the earth is not green, but a blinding, rusted red. This is Coober, Pedy, Australia. At first glance, the landscape looks like the surface of Mars. There are no trees. There are no grassy fields. And on a hot summer day, there are absolutely no people. The temperature above ground can climb to a brutal 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Fierce dust storms sweep across the plains, turning the sky into a choking red fog. In winter, the temperature reverses, dropping below freezing in the dead of night. To escape this brutal weather, the residents of Coober Pedy made a radical decision. They did not build houses on the dirt. They dug deep into the solid sandstone bedrock, building an entire underground city. These subterranean homes are called dugouts. They are hand-carved labyrinths of cool, pink stone. While the sun burns the surface at 122 degrees, the dugouts stay at a constant, perfect 73 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. They have underground bedrooms, underground kitchens, and even underground community spaces. This subterranean lifestyle was born out of a frantic search for wealth. Coober Pedy is the opal mining capital of the world. Over 70% of the planet's high-quality opals are mined here. These colorful, shining gemstones were formed millions of years ago, sometimes forming inside the ancient bones of prehistoric creatures. But this underground wealth carries a terrifying price. The desert surface surrounding the town is a minefield. Over 250,000 abandoned mine shafts riddle the landscape. These deep holes are completely vertical, narrow, and have no protective fences. If you walk outside at night, a single careless step will drop you 80 feet down into a dark, forgotten abyss. It is a landscape of hidden dangers. A world where prosperity lies in the dark, and death hides in the open air. Could you trade the warmth of the sun and the view of the sky for a permanent life inside a sandstone cave? Tell us in the comments if you would seek shelter beneath the desert floor. From the underground caves of Australia, we scale the high, frozen walls of the Himalayas. This is Bhutan, a land of deep valleys, cold rivers, and sacred peaks. And here, hanging on a steep cliff at an altitude of 10,171 feet, sits a white fortress of faith. This is Paro Taktsang, also known as the Tiger's Nest. This sacred complex hangs 2,953 feet directly above the valley floor. It looks entirely impossible. A collection of whitewashed stone buildings, with shining golden roofs, clinging to a vertical mountain face like a barnacle. To reach this high sanctuary, there are no roads, no cars, no trains, and no cable car. You must walk. The journey is a grueling 4-mile hike through dense, moss-covered pine forests. The air is thin, burning your throat with every step as your body starves for oxygen. Tibetan prayer flags flap violently in the wind, their colors worn pale by the high altitude. Near the end of the path, the route becomes a test of pure courage. You must cross a narrow, wet stone bridge, suspended over a deep, dark gorge. A massive waterfall crashes down the cliff face right beside you, filling the air with a freezing, blinding spray. But when the mountain fog rolls in, the cliff completely disappears. The valley floor below vanishes. The monastery looks as if it has detached from the earth, floating silently in a sea of white clouds. It is a place where the physical world ends, and the spiritual world begins. The interior chambers are quiet, filled with the scent of burning incense and the low chant of monks. But outside the narrow windows, the drop is absolute. It is a reminder of how high humans will climb to separate themselves from the noise of ordinary life. Would you hike through the thin mountain air to find this sacred sanctuary in the sky? Or does the thought of crossing a wet bridge at 10,000 feet make you turn back? Let us know your thoughts as we prepare to continue our journey. What if the water that saves you is also the very thing that is slowly dying? Deep within the dry coastal deserts of southwestern Peru, a landscape of massive shifting sand dunes stretches toward the empty horizon. These dunes rise up to 1,600 feet into the dry air, forming a giant natural heat funnel. And hidden at the very bottom of this deep, sandy bowl lies a true miracle of geography. This is the Huacachina Oasis. It looks like a mirage. A brilliant emerald pool of water, fringed by palm trees, buried deep in a vast ocean of dust. But this is no illusion. During the day, the temperature inside the basin climbs to a blistering 104 degrees Fahrenheit, while the desert sands absorb the heat. At night, the temperature drops rapidly, falling close to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, as the dry air loses its thermal shield. Rain is almost entirely non-existent here. The oasis survives because underground water slowly rises through deep geological fractures. But this emerald water hides a dark and dying reality. The rise of modern tourism has put a crushing weight on this tiny lake. Algae, chemicals, and human waste quietly poison the emerald waters year after year. The water level is falling. The oasis is slowly suffocating, trapped between the weight of human footprints and the sliding sands of the dunes. Would you seek refuge in a paradise that is slowly being choked to death by the very people who love it? Tell us in the comments. Now, we cross the ocean once more, leaving the dry sands of Peru to enter the quiet valleys of central Italy. Here, perched on a high peak of crumbling volcanic tufa rock, stands a medieval town that is slowly falling into the void. This is Civita di Bagnoregio. Founded over 2,000 years ago, this ancient settlement is known by a tragic name: the Dying City. In ancient times, a massive earthquake caused a catastrophic landslide, tearing away the natural stone path that connected the town to the mainland. It left Civita completely isolated, like a stone island suspended in a harsh clay valley. Today, the only way to enter this medieval relic is by walking across a narrow concrete footbridge. This bridge is over a quarter-mile long, rising steeply above a deep chasm. But this survival is extremely fragile. Rain, wind, and seismic vibrations constantly wear down the soft foundation. The edge of the cliffs is literally crumbling, shrinking by about 3 inches every single year. Massive stone walls have already collapsed into the valley below. Only about 15 permanent residents remain here, living among the chilling silence and stray cats. When winter fog covers the valley, Civita looks like a castle floating above the clouds. Could you live in a house, knowing that your floor could crumble into the abyss tomorrow? Let us know in the comments. Let us travel further east, into the rugged mountains of the Caucasus. Here, rising straight out of a green forest, stands a solitary limestone column that looks like a grey finger pointing to heaven. This is the Katskhi pillar. It stands as 130 feet tall. It is the leftover core after millions of years of wind and water erosion, leaving behind a lonely limestone mass with almost no support. And at the very top of this vertical finger sits a tiny stone church and a hermit's cell. The surface area at the summit is less than 1,600 square feet. One unconscious step backward would turn meditation into a straight fall into the void. But there is a slower threat. Limestone is a soft rock, easily dissolved by acidic rainwater over long periods of time. Its existence feels like a slow clock being shortened by nature century after century. In the 1990s, a monk scaled the pillar to live in absolute isolation. He spent over 20 years in this tiny stone cell, receiving food through a rope pulley system operated by supporters below. He climbed down only using a vertical iron ladder bolted into the sheer cliff face. He cut himself away from the ground, his family, and ordinary life to find heaven. Is this radical isolation a path to peace, or a terrifying escape from reality? Tell us what you think in the comments. Let us leave the high stone pillars and descend to the roaring, cold rivers of western Serbia. Here, in the middle of the Drina River, a tiny wooden house sits perched on a solitary, jagged rock. This is the Drina River house. Its foundation is an ancient limestone and dolomite rock, sharpened by water for thousands of years in the middle of the flow. This is not a quiet stream. When the winter snows melt, or when heavy floods arrive, the water flow can rise above 35,000 cubic feet per second. The river level can climb more than 15 feet in only a few hours. The violent current crashes directly into the house, trying to erase it from the world. Since its original construction in 1968, when teenagers built a simple wooden platform to sunbathe, the house has been completely swept away by massive floods 7 times. Yet, each time the river claims the house, the local community returns. They gather new wood, climb back onto the slippery rock, and rebuild their home. They refuse to let the river win. It is a stubborn battle between human determination and the raw, fluid power of nature. Would you build a home that you know will eventually be swept away by the river? Or does its temporary nature make it even more precious? Share your thoughts below as we prepare to continue our journey. What if you did not build a home with concrete and steel, but chose instead to live inside the very bones of the earth? On a windy, empty grass hill in northern Portugal stands a structure that rejects every rule of modern architecture. This is Casa do Penedo. Completed in the year 1974. This is not a house built on the ground, but a home built between it. 4 colossal granite boulders, buried deep in the soil, serve as the actual walls and foundation of this primitive stone fortress. From a distance, it looks like a giant boulder from the Ice Age that somehow grew windows. But on the inside, the cold stone has been hollowed out to create a living sanctuary. There is no connection to the modern electrical grid. There are no power lines stretching across these windy hills. At night, the inhabitants live only by the warm, flickering light of candles and the slow, heavy heat held inside the granite walls. Granite is an incredible insulator. It absorbs the sun's energy during the day and releases it slowly into the dark, freezing night. The home even features an outdoor swimming pool, carved directly into the natural curve of a massive granite boulder, designed to capture the freezing mountain rain. But this primitive dream is not without its hardships. Because it is so unusual, the house has been repeatedly attacked by vandals and thieves, forcing the owners to install bulletproof windows and a heavy steel door. It is a sad irony. To escape the world completely, you must build a fortress to keep it out. Would you trade the convenience of unlimited electricity to live in a dark, candlelit boulder on a lonely hill? Tell us in the comments if you would choose the quiet of the stone. Let us leave the warm hills of Portugal and fly north, deep into the freezing, wild waters of the North Atlantic. Here, rising out of the ocean like a massive, green-carpeted wedge of volcanic rock, lies Skellig Island. It is a solitary speck of land, covering only 110 acres, completely surrounded by sheer black lava cliffs that drop straight into the churning sea. And sitting alone on the grassy slope of this empty island stands a single small white house. This is often called the loneliest house on Earth. The island itself was born 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, created by a violent underwater volcanic eruption that cooled into a barren basalt fortress. The highest point of the island rises 374 feet above the crashing waves. But the isolation here is far from romantic. There are no rivers. There are no freshwater streams. There are no underground aquifers. Every single drop of water needed to survive must be captured from the sky, funneled from the roof into a system that filters the cold, salty rain. Built in 1953 as a shelter for puffin hunters, the house stands as a stark confrontation with raw nature. When the winter blizzards arrive, the island is battered by freezing winds that scream across the empty ocean. There is no heat, no internet, and no escape. You are completely suspended between the infinite blue of the sea and the endless gray of the Arctic sky. Would you have the mental strength to survive in a place where your only neighbors are nesting seabirds, and your survival depends entirely on the next rainstorm? Share your thoughts below as we prepare to cross the cold seas to the ancient forests of Russia. From the empty cliffs of Iceland, we travel east, deep into the silent frozen taiga forests of northern Russia. Here, near the 64-degree north latitude, the winter is a long, dark shadow that grips the earth for months. And rising out of the snow-covered pine trees stand colossal, wooden structures that look like fairy tale castles. These are the ancient wooden churches of Arkhangelsk. They have stood for 300 to 400 years, built entirely without a single iron nail. Ancient Russian craftsmen, working in temperatures that drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, created these masterpieces using only hand axes. They selected slow-growing pine logs that were over 100 years old. They joined them together using highly flexible, interlocking wooden joints. This design is brilliant. It allows the massive wooden buildings to expand and contract with the changing seasons, preventing the timber from cracking under the violent frost. The roofs are made of sharp, soaring tents, designed to shed heavy snow quickly so its massive weight cannot crush the structures below. But the most beautiful detail lies in the shingles. Thousands of delicate aspen shingles, called lamesh, cover the domes of the churches. Over the centuries, the weather has slowly oxidized the wood, turning the shingles a metallic, shining silver. Under the pale winter moonlight, the churches appear to glow with a soft, silver light, like silent wooden lighthouses guarding the vast, empty snow. But these structures are incredibly vulnerable. Built entirely of dry wood, a single lightning strike can burn 400 years of history to ash in less than an hour. They are beautiful, but they exist on the edge of destruction. Would you build a monument to your faith, using a material that is so easily consumed by fire? Let us know in the comments if you would dare to guard these wooden giants. We leave the frozen forests of Russia, returning south to the jagged, vertical cliffs of northern Italy. Here, carved directly into the sheer face of a grey limestone canyon, hangs a building that seems to grow out of the mountain's throat. This is the Hermitage of San Colombano. It sits suspended nearly 400 feet above the roaring torrent of the river below. The structure looks as if it has been swallowed by the giant stone jaws of the mountain. According to ancient legends, a hermit monk built this sanctuary inside a cave, where a sacred dragon was said to live. The building is a marvel of spatial engineering. It uses the natural vault of the cave as its ceiling and back wall, minimizing the amount of heavy stone that had to be hauled up the cliff. To reach this fortress of absolute silence, you must climb 102 steep steps, carved directly into the bare limestone cliff. The path is narrow, twisting close to a sheer vertical drop. But once you are inside, the atmosphere changes. The massive overhanging rock shields the hermitage like a giant umbrella, keeping the air cool and dry even in the heat of summer. Because of this protection, delicate frescoes still decorate the stone walls, untouched by the weather for hundreds of years. It was a refuge for solitary hermits, who chose to completely cut themselves off from the world until the year 1782. They lived in the dark, listening only to the roar of the river below, and the wind whistling through the canyon. Could you give up every earthly possession to live inside a cave above a roaring chasm? Tell us in the comments if you would seek the Dragon's Cave. From the narrow canyons of Italy, we take our final, highest leap into the sky. We scale the vertical, dry mountains of Ladakh, in the remote Indian Himalayas. Here, at a dizzying altitude of 12,600 feet above sea level, stands a structure that looks like a giant stone beehive. This is the Fugtal Monastery. It is built entirely around the mouth of a massive, natural cave, clinging to the vertical cliffside like an impossible insect nest. The air at this altitude is thin, containing barely enough oxygen for a human to breathe. Far below, the turquoise waters of the Lungnak River wind through a deep, barren canyon, the only line of life in a world of dry, rocky dust. There are no roads that lead to the monastery. To reach it, you must walk for days on narrow, crumbling dirt paths that hug the sheer edge of the cliffs. Every single piece of timber, every prayer book, and all the food must be carried on the backs of horses or the monks themselves. Deep inside the central cave, a sacred spring quietly floats, believed to have never run dry for centuries, sustaining the monks in near total isolation. It is a life of extreme simplicity and devotion. A world where the modern calendar has no meaning, and life is measured only by the rising of the sun and the cold of the mountain wind. Would you have the physical and mental strength to live in the thin air of the Himalayas, completely cut off from the noise of our connected world? Let us know in the comments if you would make this pilgrimage. Is there a limit to how far humanity can push into the cold, vertical fortresses of the world? We finish our journey in Switzerland, a land famous for its postcard views, but hidden behind those snowy peaks lies a brutal reality. A world where mountain communities do not live on the land, but are held tightly in its stone jaws. Let us enter the deep, silent valley of Untasheshan. Here, the village is surrounded by giant limestone walls rising thousands of feet into the sky. It feels as if you are standing at the bottom of a closed, colossal bowl of stone. The cliffs are so high that during the winter, the sun disappears behind the rock for months, leaving the valley in a freezing, permanent shadow. In this vertical landscape, survival has always depended on sheer physical labor. On the incredibly steep mountainsides, tiny wooden cabins cling to the grass slopes. These cabins do not carry wealthy tourists. They are farming outposts. Small, fragile cable cars are suspended over the deep drops, used to transport milk, hay, and daily supplies from the high cliff farms down to the valley floor. It is a way of life that has remained unchanged for hundreds of years. But winter brings a terrifying threat. Heavy snowstorms can dump over 10 feet of snow in a single day. The danger of catastrophic avalanches hangs constantly over the narrow slopes, ready to sweep entire houses away in a matter of seconds. To live here is to live in a state of constant, quiet vigilance. Yet, the old wooden houses, darkened to a deep charcoal color by centuries of sun and snow, still stand proudly against the limestone walls. They are symbols of the self-reliant and strong spirit of the early mountain people. Could you wake up every morning in a shadow, knowing a wall of snow could bury your home at any moment? Let us know in the comments if you would seek shelter in this stone bowl. Let us move deeper into the valley, where the mountains open up to reveal a blinding white storm of water. This is the Stoibefall waterfall. The name of this waterfall literally means dust. From a distance, it appears like a violent, silver column of mist flying between dark, vertical cliffs. The water falls from an extreme height of almost 600 feet. The sheer volume of water is so immense that the wind tears the stream apart before it can even touch the ground, filling the air with a thick, freezing mist. But as your eyes travel down to the base of this roaring giant, you see something completely unexpected. There is no deep, dangerous pool of water. Instead, there is a bright, emerald green pasture. And grazing peacefully in this field of mist are Swiss cows, their heavy brass bells ringing in harmony with the roar of the waterfall. Beside them, a few tiny wooden huts stand on the grass. It is a scene of impossible contrast. A picture of absolute peace, standing right beside a monument of natural destruction. But this beauty is dangerous. The wild wind generated by the falling water is so powerful that it can lift the roofs off the huts. To survive, the builders had to place massive stone blocks, weighing hundreds of pounds, on top of the wooden roofs to anchor them down. Because of the freezing cold and the intense spray, these huts are only used for a few brief weeks in the height of summer. The rest of the year, they sit silent, swallowed by ice and the endless thunder of the falls. Would you have the peace of mind to sleep inside a fragile hut, while 600 feet of falling water shakes the very ground beneath your bed? Let us travel further, to the very end of the mountain road, where the earth is blocked by massive peaks of cold granite. This is Solio. This village looks like a lonely fortress, held inside a grey world of stone. As evening falls over the peaks, the narrow stone lanes and dark doorways become silent. It feels as if time itself has forgotten this place, leaving it suspended in the Middle Ages. But the silence is suddenly torn open by a roaring sound. Just at the edge of the village, a waterfall crashes down 260 feet, throwing a pale mist over the ancient stone roofs. The old houses here are built from massive blocks of local granite, standing close together to resist the brutal winter snows. In stark contrast to the grey stone, a clear turquoise river runs through the valley, its water shining like a liquid jewel against the dark cliffs. Today, fewer than 100 people live in Solio. It is a fragile outpost of humanity, clinging to the edge of the world, protecting its ancient secrets from the noise of the modern century. Now, we descend into the Jura Valley, where a medieval town rests quietly beside a slow green river. This is Saint-Michel. It is an enchanting living museum, protected by steep, forested slopes that hide it from the outside world. At the heart of the town stands an old monastery and its carved stone cloister, where Romanesque strength and Gothic elegance meet. According to ancient legends, the town was founded by a hermit monk named Oasis, who lived in a cave and shared his home with a wild bear. It is a beautiful story of harmony between humans and the wildest forces of nature. The clear waters of the Doubs River reflect the famous four-arched stone bridge, making the entire town look as if it is floating between water and memory. It stands as a symbol of preservation, a place where time has slowed down to protect the values of an older, quieter world. Would you trade your fast-paced life to live in a town guarded by a monk and a bear? Tell us in the comments. Finally, we stand under the shadow of one of the most famous mountain walls on Earth. This is Grindelwald. Here, the soft, bright green meadows are surrounded by the terrifying, vertical cliffs of the Eiger. The contrast is breathtaking. A gentle alpine paradise, standing directly beneath a 3,000-foot wall of dark stone and ice. To prevent a single avalanche from destroying the entire community, the fragile wooden chalets were built far apart, scattered across the steep slopes. Few who visit here know that in the late 19th century, a massive fire completely wiped out this village. But the people returned, rebuilding their wooden homes under the same menacing peak. If you dare to test your courage, you can walk along a steel mesh path fixed directly into the vertical cliff face. As you look down through the metal floor, at the empty air thousands of feet below, your heart races. You realize how small, how fragile, and how temporary we truly are. When we look back across all these impossible places, from the sea-battered ruins of Skellig to the frozen vaults of Spitsbergen, and the hanging monasteries of the Himalayas, we see a shared truth. These are not just homes. They are monuments to the absolute limit of the human spirit. We are a species that refuses to be conquered by geography. But as our modern lives become more comfortable, more connected, and more crowded, we must ask ourselves, have we traded our true resilience for simple convenience? Have we lost that fire that drove our ancestors to climb 9,000 steps, or live inside a volcano? If you had to leave the comfort of your city tomorrow, which of these extreme outposts would you choose to make your final stand? Drop your choice in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to Earth Discovered as we continue to uncover the hidden wonders of our world. Thank you for walking beside us on the edge of the void. Until our next journey, look closely at the landscapes around you, and remember how beautiful and how fragile our presence on this planet truly is.